All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack one of the most provocative analyses of religion and sexuality you'll ever come across, and it's from a man who was once a religious authority himself. Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. For billions of people, holy books are considered the direct, unedited word of God. But what if they're not? Today we're diving into the work of Turan Dursun, a former Islamic mufti who took his expert knowledge and turned a critical eye on the very texts he used to preach. He argued that if you look closely underneath the divine veneer, you find borrowed myths, deeply flawed heroes, and man-made laws. And this forces us to ask a really tough question. Are these books a reflection of God, or a reflection of the humans who wrote them? This is exactly the kind of question Turan Dursun dared to ask. He didn't just read the holy books of the Abrahamic faiths, the Torah, the Quran. He dissected them. He looked at their stories and laws about sexuality, not with the eyes of a believer, but with the cold, hard lens of a historian and a critic. I mean, think about it. We're taught that these texts are literally from God, the ultimate instruction manual for how to live. They're supposed to define right and wrong, especially when it comes to our most private lives. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is the core of Dursun's entire argument. He basically said, what if we peel back all those layers of divine authority? What do we find? Well, he proposed we find something else entirely. Stories borrowed from much older civilizations, ancient tribal laws dressed up as divine commands, and holy men driven by some very, very human desires. So let's take a look at what he uncovered. So, following Dursun's trail, let's start right at the beginning, the creation of humanity. I mean, this is the story that sets the whole stage for everything else. For sex, desire, sin, you name it. You know the story. We all do. God makes Adam, then poof, makes Eve from his rib. They're chilling in paradise, the Garden of Eden, with just one rule. Don't eat the fruit from that one tree. Of course, a serpent comes along, tempts Eve, she takes a bite, gives some to Adam, and boom, they're kicked out, punished for disobeying. But here's the kicker. Dursun pointed out that this story isn't nearly as original as many people think. Centuries, and I mean centuries, before the Torah was ever written down, you had Sumerian and Babylonian myths. They told a story about a guy named Adapa, a wise man who was offered the food of life by the gods. But he gets tricked into refusing it, and in doing so, he loses the chance at immortality for all of humanity. The parallels, they're just impossible to ignore. So you have to ask yourself, right? Is the story of Adam and Eve this totally unique divine revelation? Or is it more like an adaptation, a retelling of a much, much older human story that's been tweaked to fit a newer monotheistic worldview? This is the first major crack in the foundation that Dursun points to. Okay, so let's keep building on that. From the big creation myths, Dursun then turns his focus to the revered figures themselves, the prophets. And this is where the stories get, frankly, even more complicated and pretty shocking. So take Abraham. The Torah says he goes to Egypt because of a famine. He's terrified that the Pharaoh is going to kill him just to take his wife, Sarah, because she's so beautiful. So what does he do? He tells everyone she's his sister. And guess what? Pharaoh takes her into his palace. Not only does Abraham save his own skin, but he gets rewarded for it with sheep and cattle and all sorts of things. And then you've got the story of Sodom. A violent mob surrounds the prophet Lot's house. They're demanding he hand over his guests, who are actually angels in disguise. And Lot's solution? He makes this absolutely staggering offer. He says, look, I have 2 daughters who have never been with a man. Let me bring them out to you and you can do whatever you want with them. Just to protect his guests. Or what about Jacob? He ends up married to 4 women at the same time. You've got 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel, and then both of their handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah. The text describes this whole soap opera of jealousy and rivalry and baby-making that ultimately leads to the 12 tribes of Israel. These are not simple, pious stories. And of course, there's Samson, the guy with godlike strength, all tied up in his long hair. But his epic downfall doesn't come from a mighty army. Nope, it comes from his overwhelming passion for one woman, Delilah, who betrays him, leading to his capture and, ultimately, his death. So what we're seeing here are prophets who aren't just holy figures on a pedestal. They're deeply and sometimes pretty disturbingly human. It's a view that really challenges a lot of traditional beliefs. And hey, if you're finding this deep dive into the material as fascinating as I do, please take a second to subscribe and hit that like button. It truly helps us keep making these explorations. Okay, so we've looked at the stories. But what about the rules, the laws? This is where Durson argues religion shifts from storytelling to direct social control, especially when it comes to sex. And the Torah is incredibly specific about this stuff. The punishments for breaking sexual rules aren't just vague suggestions. They are brutal, explicit legal commands. Just look at this. Adultery with a married woman, death for both of them. With an engaged girl in the city, both are to be stoned. The law even makes a distinction between a city and the countryside. It shows you just how detailed and legalistic this whole approach was. Right, so here's the crucial point. Where did these laws even come from? Durson brings up the historical evidence, pointing out that legal systems with almost the exact same rules and punishments for sexual behavior existed long before Moses. The famous Code of Hammurabi from ancient Babylon has incredibly similar laws. It really makes you wonder if these divine decrees actually came from much older man-made legal traditions. And this just gives you a sense of the sheer scope of the control. The Torah lays out this whole comprehensive system of rules that covers pretty much every aspect of sex that wasn't for making babies or socially approved. Incest, homosexuality, prostitution, even bestiality. The rules are crystal clear, and the punishments are severe. It's a total framework for sexual regulation. And all of this brings us right to the very heart of Taran Durson's entire analysis. After looking at the myths, the prophets, and the laws, what are we actually left with? So we started with the creation story, the absolute bedrock of the faith, and we saw how it looks a lot like much older legends from Mesopotamia. Then we looked at the lives of the prophets themselves, figures like Abraham, Lot, Samson, whose own stories, in their own holy books, are filled with moral compromises, deception, and destructive passions. And finally, we looked at these so-called divine laws on sexuality, only to find that they have clear ancestors in older, secular legal systems, like the Code of Hammurabi. And so we end up right where Taran Durson leaves us, with a profound and, let's be honest, pretty unsettling question. If the holy books are so deeply tangled up with human history, with older cultures, with flawed characters, and with man-made laws that came before them, can they really be the direct, unfiltered word of a perfect, all-knowing God? Or are they maybe a reflection of something else entirely? The evolution of human society, our morality, our storytelling, all packaged under the banner of divine authority? That's the question Durson's work forces every reader to confront.